take you to different historical places in Delhi, like Kutub and all these things through her presentation. So I welcome Ranjita Datta here.
I am Ranjita Datta. I teach at Jamia Medieval Indian History in the Department of History and Culture. And I primarily specialize on what is called medieval South India. But over the years, we've been teaching a mix of several courses. So today I am going to talk on 3 huge areas of medieval Indian history, which are very huge. So it has to be compressed, which is Delhi Sultanate, Vijaynagar Empire, and regional kingdoms. And I'll explain to you briefly what it all means. The time period, which is of this particular, all these 3 political entities, is, as you can see, from the 12th to the 16th centuries. This was a very, very important period of Indian history. Popularly, it has been called the medieval period. Okay, in most of the history books that you pick up, it's always called the medieval period by the historians. Now, Delhi Sultanate covered North India, Central India. Next, please. As you can see, there's Delhi, there is South India, which is Daulatabad, and there are various portions, the dark green portions. It goes right till what is the present-day Pakistan. Vijaynagar Empire, if you can just... Vijaynagar Empire, as you can see, can you just come down a bit? Vijaynagar Empire, as you can see, is on the south of India. Today, the modern states that come under Vijayanagar are actually Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka. Now, the third political entity, which we will do briefly, is, of course, the regional states. As you can see, there are several regional states which came up during this period: Khandesh, Ahmednagar, Bijapur, Berar, Bidar, Hyderabad, Golconda, several of them. So this is what we would be talking of where today is concerned. Now, the medieval period becomes important for a very, very crucial reason, because of the way Indian history is divided. And where Indian history is divided, medieval is always seen from the 7th century to the early 19th century. And it covers, your Rajput polities, which I assume you would have done a bit of it earlier. We have Delhi Sultanate, Vijayanagar, the Mughals, you have the regional kingdoms, coming of Europeans, Portuguese, Dutch, French, English, and finally the establishment of the British rule. So it's a huge period in Indian history. And it has been also one of the most controversial periods of Indian history. It has been controversial because it's assumed that in 12th century, Islam came to India. It's a wrong assumption. Islam came much earlier. It came in 8th century on the southern coast of Kerala, and it came by trade. It did not come as it has been popularly perceived, particularly by right-wing historians, that it came with the Turks and hence it's an invasion, which is incorrect. It came normally, peacefully, through trade by the Arabs who settled on the southwest coast, which includes today's Kerala. It includes a part of Maharashtra, where it settled and it spread from there. So it becomes a very, very controversial period of Indian history. If you are tracking newspapers carefully, you would be aware that in 1992 there was a demolition of Babri Masjid. And the assumption was this, which is in Ayodhya, that Babur came, he destroyed the so-called Hindu structures. I put it in quotes because we'll be discussing that these are all imaginations which have got a lot of political mileage, and he constructed this masjid. So medieval period is the most misunderstood period of Indian history. So today when we look at it, we should be aware of the fact that it's a very, very long period, and in this period there are 4 things which are very, very important. Next, please. And what are these 4 characteristics? First is the spread of Islam in the Indian subcontinent. The Turks came, and these were Turks who had just converted to Islam. They came from Central Asia, they came from West Asia, and the people who came were the Ghaznavide Turks. In the Abbasi Caliphate, you have a lot of Turks who were employed as soldiers. They were excellent horsemen. They were employed as soldiers, they were employed as administrators. Over a period of time when the Caliphate weakened, these Turks took over. We have the Seljuks, followed by the Ghaznavides, and it is the Ghaznavide Turks who actually started moving towards northwest, which is the present-day Pakistan, and slowly they made their incursion into the Indian subcontinent. Now, the second thing which is very, very important in this period is that you have pan-regional setups which have come in, which is, of course, the Delhi Sultanate and the Vijaynagar Empire. Next, please. What do I mean by pan-regional entities? By pan-regional political setups, it means that they cover a large number of cultural and linguistic zones. You see, these are not homogeneous entities. Delhi Sultanate had large number of people who spoke different languages, they followed different culture, they followed different religion. It was a very, very multicultural setup. So these are pan-regional, meaning they cross across the region. Secondly, even in the case of Vijayanagar, you will find that it also covered multicultural, multilinguistic zones. The third thing which is happening during this period is the rise of regional states. You have, what are these regional states? They come through, they are based on language. The concept of language is very important. You can just go to the next one. Okay, yeah. These are regional polities. The language becomes very important. Local heroes are very important. And interestingly, all these regional states challenged the authority of Delhi Sultanate as well as that of the Vijayanagar Empire. You have, these are very less researched works in Indian history. You have Jaunpur, which is today in eastern Uttar Pradesh. You have the famous Sharki rulers who challenged the authority of Delhi Sultanate. You have Khandesh. You have in Vijayanagar Empire a lot of other small polities who are challenging the authority. So this is a period where you have big empires, but you also have regional states coming up who have strong local identities. The fourth important aspect is that there are 2 big imperial capitals which come up in this period. One is Delhi. I mean, you're familiar with this. You've been there. You've traveled here. And today we'll be briefly doing the history of Delhi so that you get the sense of where all you've been. And secondly is Hampi. Hampi is the capital of the Vijayanagar Empire. And it is in today's North Karnataka. Today it is in ruins, and it is a small, it's in a small village which is called Hampi, and it's a World Heritage Site. But it was a huge city once upon a time with numerous structures, with very well laid water channels, temples, mosques, streets. But over the period of time, it sort of fell into insignificance because of the loss of power of the Vijayanagar Empire. Now, why doesn't this happen to Delhi? Why doesn't Delhi fall into ruins after it ceased to be the capital of Delhi Sultanate? The answer lies in the fact that Delhi as a capital came up just not because it was established by the rulers. It was very active over a period of time in trade, in culture, in economy. So even if the political power falls, these are the areas which sustain Delhi throughout, and that has been the case even till day. So Delhi's history becomes very crucial because it survived all kinds of political downfalls and yet it managed to thrive. So this is an overview which I have given you from the 12th to the 16th century, which I'll be dealing today. I'll begin with Delhi Sultanate first. And briefly speaking, Delhi Sultanate refers to a period of 320 years, from 1206 to 1526 AD. During this period, 5 dynasties ruled over North India, southern plateau region called the Deccan, eastern parts of and parts of central India, and with Delhi as their capital. Now, for some historical facts, now which are these dynasties? You have the early Turkish rulers, who are also called Mamluks, and these are the rulers in them. Kutubuddin Aybak, Iltutmish. Kutubuddin Aybak and Iltutmish actually were responsible for the construction of Qutub Minar and the various sites in Qutub Minar respectively. You have Razia, a lady ruler who was extremely popular, and she created a lot of controversy during that period because when we read the chroniclers, we find that they find very difficult to accept Razia as the queen. And there's a very famous Hindi film which is also made on her. Then you have Balban. So that is one dynasty. After that, you have the Khalji dynasty coming up. And the characteristic of the Khalji dynasty is this, that the ruler Alauddin Khalji, the second ruler, he expanded the kingdom beyond Delhi. He expanded the Sultanate beyond Delhi. He went right till south, right till the tip of Madurai. And he introduced certain reforms in the empire which had a tremendous effect on the economy, which had to do with the market, which also had to do with the currency. Then we have, followed by the Khalji dynasty, we have the Tughlaq dynasty. Tughlaq dynasty is also a very, very well-known dynasty in the history of India. They have immense contribution to the history of Delhi. You haven't visited Tughlaqabad. If you ever have the time, do visit. It's very close to, near IIT. And it's a sprawling area. That was a fort area which Muhammad bin Tughlaq has supposed to have established. It's a huge sprawling area. Muhammad bin Tughlaq is again a very, very well-known ruler of Indian history because he expanded the kingdom and created a second capital in the Deccan region, south region, which is called Daulatabad. And it created a lot of controversies. People were very unhappy when they had to shift to Daulatabad. You have numerous stories about that. Now, the last ruler in the Tughlaq dynasty is Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Firoz Shah Tughlaq is again someone who contributed to the structures of Delhi. You have some structures near Khas. There's a city he created in Delhi which is called Firozabad. So we find that all these rulers focused on Delhi as their capital. Then the fourth dynasty are the Sayyids, or the Sayyid dynasty, about which very little has been researched, and they ruled barely for 30 years. So they didn't contribute much. Lastly, you have, of course, the Lodi dynasty. And till day we have names of places, roads which are named after Lodis. They have the famous ruler Behlul Lodi and Sikandar Lodi. All right, you have the Lodi gardens, you have the Lodi tomb. If you travel down, you have the Lodi road. So they're all named after these rulers. And it was during this period in 1526 when Babur attacked India, and there was a famous battle of Panipat, which was fought. Panipat is today located in Haryana. And of course, after that, we have the establishment of the Mughal Empire. Now, I begin first with the establishment of Delhi Sultanate. And you've traveled, you've been to Qutub Minar. Now, have you, I don't know what your guide told you, but as I said, this is a period which is mired in controversy because Mahmud of Ghazni came. There are numerous stories about Mahmud of Ghazni destroying, plundering. He's considered the big bad villain. He's someone, people write that he converted people to Islam forcibly. The concept of the sword of Islam becomes very famous with him. Now, let us question these popular assumptions on the basis of historical fact. You have people saying you've been to Qutub Minar, and there are several structures which are Hindu structures in the literal sense, if you've noticed. And people say that, temples were destroyed and Qutub Minar was built, and these are the material from there. I don't know whether you've noticed, but there are several places where there are structures which are made in that fashion. Now, let us question this through Qutub Minar, and also let us look at what actually Mahmud of Ghazni was wanting to do when he came to India. Did he want to spread Islam? The answer is no. He had no such desire. Did he wish to plunder the wealth of Islam of India? Marginally, yes. But when Mahmud came to India, the period of 11th century, his own kingdom in Ghazni was in a very bad shape, and his authority was being challenged. So he had to prove that he is a ruler who can overtake conquests. He is somebody who can capture areas and spread the empire. So it is more to do with the politics of Ghazni rather than the attraction of India which brought Mahmud here. And we forget that a large part of India, which is the northwest part, where today's Punjab is, all of it was already in interaction with Central Asia. So people were, in Central Asia and in West Asia, people were aware of India. They were aware of this part of India. There was an interaction, there was trade which was taking place. So it was nothing very new for them. So Mahmud comes, and that is why we find that Mahmud took these campaigns to prove his power to his own countrymen. That here I am, I'm extremely powerful, don't take me for granted, I can rule over you. And he commissioned several Persian works which described his glory, exaggerated, which was sort of said, here he comes, who's spreading Islam, who's capturing, who's looting, who's carrying so much of wealth. These are important actions and achievements of a ruler in the medieval period, whether it be outside India or whether it be within India. A ruler has to wage war. You are not a ruler if you don't fight. What kind of a ruler you are if you don't fight? This is a medieval concept. It's all over the world. What kind of a ruler you are if you are not bringing, income through war? That means you are useless. These are qualities of a ruler. A ruler has to show that he is brave. So we find a lot of these Persian sources, which were written in Persian, eulogizing, praising Mahmud to a large detail. And of course, you have the famous story of the temple at Somnath, which is in Gujarat, where it is said that Mahmud plundered it 21 times, which is again a story of fabrication, which was written in these Persian sources to glorify Mahmud. Now let's look at it. In these sources, it is written that he plundered the temple, he destroyed it, and he built a mosque. Now, if you are conquering something 21 times, first time you will break the temple and build a mosque. Next time, then what are you attacking? You're attacking a mosque. You're not attacking a temple, it's gone. So these were stories which were made, and when we look at the Sanskrit texts which were written here, when we look at the Gujarati texts which were written during that period, interestingly, nobody even mentions Mahmud's raid to Somnath. It was not important for people of Somnath who came, who plundered again in inverted commas, questioned. But it was very important for the Ghaznavid Persian sources because they had to tell the world, which was Central Asia and West Asia, here is a king who is extremely powerful. So we find that the coming of the Turks to India was actually just not based on invasion. It was because of long periods of migration, even before Mahmud came. As I told you, people are aware of this part. There are exchanges which are taking place, trade which is taking place. Silk route passed through Kashmir, went through Central Asia, then went ahead. So people are already aware of each other. It was not a surprise when Mahmud came or when Delhi Sultanate was established. The second point which a lot of historians point out when they look at Qutub Minar, and they say here is there's a mosque in Qutub Minar. I don't know whether you've visited that mosque. Now, it has been called Quwwat al-Islam, and literally it means the might of Islam. Now, historians say that the Delhi Sultanate rulers wanted to assert the supremacy of Islam, but it is incorrect. It has been researched and it has been found out that the word Quwwa, which means power, was actually for the city of Delhi. In the 13th century, the city of Delhi was referred as Quwwat. It means it was the center of power. And the historians have incorrectly understood it. And the mosque in Qutub Minar is actually called Qubba, which means sanctuary of God, where people will come, they will pray, they will congregate, they will be at peace with each other. So actually the word which is for the mosque is Qubba, and hence you see it becomes what you call Qubbat al-Islam, which means the sanctuary of Islam. And Delhi Sultanate was constantly threatened by Mongol invasions. Mongols were constantly looking to this side in Central Asia. They had overrun this entire place. So the mosque became a center of refuge, that in case the Mongols attack, all of you rush and come and congregate in the mosque, at least you will be safe. And it didn't matter who came. It didn't matter to the rulers of Delhi Sultanate that who came, what was their religion, what was their background. Because they felt this was a place they're ruling, these are our subjects, and they have to be protected from the Mongol invasions. So we find that Qutub Minar, as has been misunderstood, was not constructed as a show of power over local Hindus, or it was not at all a mark of conversion. It was constructed to bring different people into one part together. You see, it was a huge place which they were ruling. They had come here for the first time. They didn't know people, and they had to bring people off and on together. Like in India, we have the celebration of the Republic Day. Everybody goes to India Gate and sits and watches the parade. Independence Day. Even if we don't go, we do switch on the television, and as a ritual, we watch it. So it brings us together. So Qutub Minar was actually built not for a show of power. It was rather an attempt to create a centralized symbol where everybody would come and collect. And we find that Turks, the migration was taking place much before Mahmud came. So you have Sufi mystics, you have the Persian literati, you have Central Asian tribal population which who was coming, and they used to come and congregate, in this mosque. Now, next please. Now, the Turks, just very briefly, the architecture of Qutub Minar, because you have visited it. The Turks brought with them the knowledge of arches, all right, and they conveyed it to the Indian builders. After all, who's going to make these structures? They're not going to get workmen from Central Asia. It is the Indians here who have to, it is the local population here who have to build these structures. So this technique was transmitted to the Indian builders, to the Indian masons and stone cutters in this period. On the other hand, Indian builders were required. Indian builders or the Indian stone cutters also had their knowledge of art, aesthetics, architecture. So they used, their own architecture. And actually, Qutub Minar is a fusion of the Turkish and the local architecture which was present here. It is a symbol of a composite culture. It is not a symbol of assertion of power. It is a symbol of composite culture. And the Delhi Sultans gave freedom to the local masons to do whatever they wanted. That is why you will find kalash. Kalash is a pot. If you've seen the Qutub Minar carefully, there is a pot, there are lotus buds, and these are very, very, local motifs, Indian motifs, and they intertwine with Persian and Arabic, calligraphy. So, all this has been brought in together. So it is actually a case of a composite culture. You have a umbrella, a chhatri, which we call a kiosk kind of a thing. You have, of course, a jharoka, and these jharoka is a window. So all of them became the permanent features of Sultanate architecture, and Sultanate architecture hence was a fusion of Indian as well as Turkish architecture. And this tradition was carried even to the Mughals. I'll not get into much detail because you have a topic, you have a lecture on art and architecture. But my point is that the establishment of Delhi Sultanate is not a surprise as it has been projected. It is not because suddenly one fine day the Turks decided to enter India and capture it. It's a process which was taking place over a period of time. It was the politics of Central Asia which drove Mahmud this side. And with Mahmud, the process started, and finally we have the establishment of Delhi Sultanate with, of course, Qutubuddin Aibak, who spearheaded the construction of Qutub Minar, in the 11th century. Next slide, please. Yeah. So with the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, there are certain new things which entered the Indian scene. Apart from the architecture, you have a Persian literary culture. You have the use of Persian in administrative and literary writings. You have the Muslim intelligentsia. Tariq means history. Huge numbers of history were written. Paper was used for the first time, to write these histories. Before that in India, nobody used paper. And of course, you have a lot of information about political and social history, though not much about economic history. The next one, please. Now you have rise of towns. Within Delhi, you have the 6 cities which have got established during this period. You have a town planning, you have urban life. New cities came up, a new technology came up. Cement was being used, lime and mortar was being used for the first time for these constructions. Before that, Indians did not have any binding material. They used to pile up stones and that would press against each other. You have paper, you have cloth. So there was a major revolution where technology and urban countryside is concerned. Next, please. Now, what are our sources to study this particular period? Historians depend on sources. And we find that, as I said, there was a huge lot of literary writing which was taking place. And you have histories being written, which are in language Persian, it's called Tariq as singular and Tawarikh in plural. Most of these people who wrote these histories were very learned men, but they were urban people. They rarely went into the villages. And of course, they wrote about the rulers, about their lives, and their views are often interpreted as actual events of history, which is not correct. It is their own views. For example, a very famous writer of history whose name is Minhaj ul Suraj. Suraj writes on Razia. Suraj was very unhappy when Razia ascended the throne. He felt, how could a woman come? And he admitted that Razia was more qualified and more able than her brothers. But he was not comfortable to have her as a queen or as a ruler. And he said, the work of a woman is actually to spin the wheel, and make cloth. She should not be here. And since Minhaj was very unhappy, he felt that the nobles were very unhappy. But if we look at other sources of history, which are inscriptions, which are coins, we find that Razia was able to rule very well. Compared to her brothers, if they had ascended, it wouldn't have been a very great effort. Now, next please. Now, when we come to the expansion of the Delhi Sultanate, we find that the Delhi Sultanate went wherever they went. They established fortified towns, meaning they constructed small forts, and in that there were cities which are called garrisons. All right, and this is the early period. During the period of Iltutmish, we find it is the western part, which is Multan, Lahore, and then you come right till Lakhnauti, which is today's Bengal. This was the area, which they occupied in the initial period. Now, it was not a very easy time for them because all these areas are very far from Delhi. And there were constant rebellions taking place. There was bad weather, which the people of Central Asia are not used to. It's a cooler place. Rains don't strike the way they strike in Delhi. It's not humid. So bad weather, flooding of the rivers, and on the other hand, Mongols coming from Afghanistan trying to invade. So we find that this was a period which was not very easy for the Delhi Sultanate people. Now we find, next please, we find that it's only under Alauddin Khalji and Muhammad bin Tughlaq that the expansion started taking down south. And they took over a lot of regional kingdoms. If you can just see, these are arrows which have gone to the south. And a lot of expansion took place during this period. And we find that Alauddin Khalji was wise enough not to expand administratively into this area. What he did was that he made the regional rulers pay him a tribute, pay him a huge sum of money every year, and he left it to themselves. Whereas Muhammad bin Tughlaq actually tried to rule and tried to administer, and that is where the problems started coming. He faced a maximum number of rebellions during his period. Now, both the Tughlaqs, the Khaljis before that, they were plagued, they were attacked by Mongols all the time. But both of them reacted in their own way. Alauddin Khalji strengthened his northwest frontier policy, as it's popularly called, northwest frontier policy, whereas Muhammad bin Tughlaq decided to create a second capital in the Deccan region, which today it is in the Maharashtra district, close to Bombay. It is called Daulatabad. And after he created the second capital, he had to populate it. People have to go and stay. So he ordered, that is what the famous chronicler writes, Ziauddin Barri, that he ordered, the entire city of Delhi to shift. It's just not the fact that, he could go with his nobles. He ordered people, he ordered Sufi saints, he ordered everybody to shift. And that became a huge problem. People resisted. Nobody wanted to relocate themselves. And the entire campaign was a failure. And finally, again, they were brought back. Now, in today's time, traveling from Jamia to, let us say, Mehroli is such an effort. We cannot manage. You can imagine in those days, with such means of communication and facilities, to travel from Delhi to what is today Bombay, near that, is going to be a huge effort. People died on the way, there were rebellions, there were thefts, all kinds of things happened, and his project was a failure. Now, Muhammad bin Tughlaq is known for several projects which were ahead of his times. And because they were ahead of his times, he was not successful at all. With the result, he became extremely unpopular. Today in Delhi, opposite the Tughlaqabad fort, his tomb is there. And it is said that if anybody had a problem, they were supposed to write in a small piece of paper and drop it in his tomb. So by the time the emperor was taken to be buried, that's a story which we get to know from Barney. By the time the emperor died and he was taken to be buried, the tomb was full of papers. People were so much against him. That is what is being told to us. One project which he introduced was called the token currency. We use today paper currency, which is a token currency. It's not the actual currency. It is measured against gold and silver. Now, in those days, he introduced the copper currency. And when he introduced the copper currency, what was happening was that in Delhi Sultanate, people started making counterfeit copper coins. With the result, the whole treasury was full of fraudulent counterfeit coins. Now, the reason why he decided to introduce, copper currency instead of the gold and the silver, this was a period where the international, availability of silver was very, very low. The Americas had just got conquered. The minings were not so strong. And the Portuguese were still, trying to figure out how to mine silver. So the international supply of silver was very, very low. So to counter that, he introduced the copper currency, which unfortunately met with a tremendous amount of failure. He introduced taxes in the province of Doab. Doab meaning the land between Ganga and Yamuna. Do means two and Ab is river. He did that not to trouble the poor farmers, but he did that so that the rich farmers who were sitting on so much of wealth, who were not paying taxes, they would be paying taxes on time. And he introduced very, very strict measures to take taxes from them. But unfortunately, the rich farmers passed it on to the poor farmers, and it became a case of oppression of the peasantry. The net result was the famous peasant rebellion in the Doab region. So we find that Muhammad bin Tughlaq's period, which is a very, very popular period amongst the history. In fact, he's called the wisest fool in the history of India. Has been very, very much discussed. Now, let us very briefly look at the administration of the Delhi Sultanate. Now, the Delhi Sultanate, as I told you, was a vast kingdom. It required governors and administrators. Now, rather than appointing aristocrats and landed, chieftains of the North India, Iltutmish and the early rulers depended on slaves who are called bandagan in Persian. Can you go to the next? No, let it be here. Let this be here, sorry. Yeah, okay, they are called bandagan in Persian, which means slaves. Now, these slaves are not domestic slaves the way it was in the Roman Empire. These slaves were slaves who were captured during the time of war. They were excellent soldiers. They were extremely good horsemen. Some of them became rulers. In fact, Kutubuddin Aibak is one such person who came from the family of slaves, and that's why the first period of Delhi Sultanate is also called the slave dynasty. He's supposed to be a Mamluk. Mamluk were these slaves who gained freedom over a period of time. All right. So they were excellent horsemen. They were excellent warriors, and they were very good administrators. They were very learned people. So they were not like the slaves which you see in Roman Empire working, in the farms, etc. So the Delhi Sultanate, since the Turks came from Central Asia, they relied on the slaves, for their administration. Now, these slaves were, of course, very loyal to their master, because they were cut off from their family. For over the years, they just had no connection with their family. So they were very, very loyal to their masters. The Sultan could trust and rely on them. They were trained in the offices. And Khaljis and Tughlaqs particularly continued to use slaves and people. And they also raised people from humble birth. Barni is extremely angry with Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He writes, Muhammad bin Tughlaq has appointed barbers, he has appointed weavers, he has appointed butchers, into the offices. He used to be very angry because Barni was very conscious of birth. For him, aristocracy and birth was very important. But by and large, we find that a large number of people from humble background made it very big in the Delhi administration. And with the result, we find that the older elite who expected offices, who expected a whole lot of things, were very, very angry, and there were constant rebellions which were fostered, by the older elites during this period. So you'll have in the Delhi Sultanate court, the older elites conspiring with the ulema, with other people, and they're trying to sort of, foster rebellion, dethrone the emperor. Muhammad bin Tughlaq faced a lot of these problems. Now, we find that during this period, during the period of Delhi Sultanate, several constructions took place in which a large number of, masons, craftsmen were employed. And with their long association with the rulers of the Delhi Sultanate, they gradually, I use the word gradually, they started converting to Islam. So the conversion to Islam was not sudden, it was not forced, it was over many, many centuries, and it did not happen overnight. It was over many centuries of interaction, it was over many centuries of visiting the Sufi dargahs, that you have very, very gradual, slow process of conversion which takes place, unlike, what has been assumed during this period. Now, I'll just read out this paragraph from Ziauddin Barni, who criticized Muhammad bin Tughlaq to say the kind of people who were employed. And these people were new converts to Islam, and they became very powerful in Muhammad bin Tughlaq's administration. I'll just read out. Sultan appointed Aziz Khummar, who's a wine distiller, Firoz Hajjam, who's a barber, Monk, a tabak, a cook, and 2 gardeners, Ladha and Pira, to high administrative posts. This is what he says, and he's very upset about it. So what I'm trying to tell you is that being appointed or being associated with Delhi Sultanate was also a process of social mobility. Everybody is looking for opportunities. Indians go to America, Indians go to Australia, Indians go everywhere. For what? For social mobility. People from villages come to Delhi, they come to city for social mobility. So Delhi Sultanate during that period provided a huge opportunity to a large number of Indians to come up in the society. Okay, and it was looked upon as a very lucrative region where people could come, they could get employment, their birth was not important, and they could make a lot of money. Now, the last important thing about the administration of Delhi Sultanate is their system of iqtadari. You see, how will a kingdom run? How will an empire run if it doesn't have money? Where will the money come from? It will come from the taxes. All right, so we find that the sultans of Delhi appointed governors to various places. They were given various regions, which was called Iqta. And of course, they were supposed to collect taxes and pass it on to the emperor. There were very strong chances that a lot of these Iqtadars, that is the holder of Iqta, which is a province, would rebel. They would not pay the taxes themselves, would develop local roots and become local rulers there themselves. You see, so to avoid that, Iqta became a transferable assignment. No governor was allowed to stay in one province for more than 3 years or 5 years, a practice which we follow till today in the Indian administrative system. People get transferred on very, very regular basis. Idea was that no governor, nobody should develop strong local influence as to threaten the ruler during this period. So you have various kinds of taxes coming up. You have, huge number of constructions which is happening. You at the same time have the Mongol invasion taking place. And lastly, we find that it is, it is a big attack from the Mongols, along with an attack from the Mughals, that Delhi Sultanate completely collapsed by the 16th century. So this is the history very briefly of Delhi Sultanate. Just for a recap, establishment is very important because it is mired in historical controversy, which unfortunately influences the politics of today. So it's very important to know how they came and how they established. The markers of the architecture, which are interpreted often incorrectly, are actually something else which has to be understood. Secondly, the kind of people who wrote about the history of Delhi, their perspective. Thirdly, the administration of Delhi, very briefly speaking. Fourthly, some of the administrative attitudes of the rulers themselves. Now let us look at the city of Delhi, which you've been here for so many days, the capital Delhi, and how the Sultanate, has sort of used Delhi as their capital. So very briefly, I'll get into the history of Delhi, and I'm sure you can identify with certain things. Now, till 12th century, you will not find any reference to Delhi. There are references of cities and towns outside Delhi. There are references to cities and towns in South India, but there's no reference to Delhi. This is because Delhi was not a very important place till then. Nobody even thought of it. It's only in the 8th century that the Rajput kingdom of the Tomar dynasty, they actually, followed by Chauhans in the 12th century, they built fortifications. They built forts in today what is Kutub Minar during this period. All right. And we find that in the middle of Kutub Minar, I don't know whether you visited that, there is a place called Lal Kot. and it has ruins of the forts which were built by these early Rajput rulers. If you ever have the time on your own, or if you visit India next time, next to Qutub Minar, there's a huge ruin structure which very few people go to because it's not popularized, but it's very beautiful. It is called the Archeological Park. And you have the tomb of the ruler of Delhi, Sultan Balban. You have Sikandar Lodi, who was one of the rulers of Delhi Sultanate. He has constructed a beautiful step well there. Step well is, to get water from the ground. And there are rooms all over. There's a very famous shrine of the Sufi saint called Jamali Kamali, a 16th century shrine. And that place is full of stories about jinns, loosely translated as ghosts, but they're not ghosts, but there are lots of stories, BBC did a documentary about at night what happens to this place. Is it really haunted? And like all of us imagine ghosts, so they also imagine they can hear voices, they can hear people walking across, but they can't see. And this was an area from which the horsemen came. This was an area where, battles were fought. And you find the ruins of the old fort of Delhi during this period. Now, we find that it is actually the Turks who came from Central Asia. When they established their empire here, Delhi became a very, very vibrant place. Delhi, as to not what we today know Delhi, but the area of Mehroli and the Kutub. It became an extremely vibrant place, and that is where the vibrancy of Delhi actually comes. Now, in the popular lore, it is said that there are 7 cities of Delhi, but actually Delhi was established more than, 7 times during this period. And the architecture was, as I said, it was a composite architecture. It was mixed. And you have, people with a lot of cultured people living here, educated people living here. Now, let us look at the first city of Delhi in 12th century, which was the Qutub Delhi. It is also called Kila Rai Pithora. All right. And here we find that it was established after Qutubuddin Aibak defeated Prithviraj Chauhan, who was a ruler of the Rajputs. A fort was built by Prithviraj Chauhan before that, which is called Kila Rai Pithora. Do revisit if you have the time. It is now in ruins. Information about this Kila, which is fort, you get from the Persian sources of Delhi Sultanate, which are called Tajul Basir and Tabqat-e Nasiri. Qutubuddin Aibak took possession of his fort on the behalf of the Sultan of Delhi, because Qutubuddin Aibak was a general who was Muhammad Ghori. And the fort, there was no Qutub Minar then, and the fort became the center of the early rulers of Delhi Sultanate, and this is the fort of the Chauhan rulers. So we find that during this period, Delhi, or this part of Delhi, became very, very important, and everybody from Central Asia, from other parts of India, started migrating during this period. Now, the advantage of Delhi was, the natural advantage of Delhi. You see, it's very close to the Ganges, that is Ganga, and it is also very close to the Indus. So if you enter Delhi, you can control these flood plains. You can control a lot of these flood plains during this period. So it was a gateway to the Gangetic plain, which is today the part of Uttar Pradesh. At a local level, it had very good landscape. It had hills which were covered with vegetation. The last crop of Aravalli Hills, which is the oldest mountain range in the world, touches Delhi. So Delhi has natural frontiers of defense. Anybody, any ruler who wants to come and establish himself and wants to be safe, Delhi would be a natural choice. It had a good vegetation, and of course, it had the river Yamuna flowing. So water was not an issue if you shifted this side. Climate was not very good, as we can see. I mean, you're fortunate that you've got rains. Otherwise, June is sweltering in Delhi. All right. People had a lot of problems. Babur repeatedly complained about it, but they stayed on because of the wealth it provided during this period. So this became a natural area for the rulers of Delhi Sultanate to settle down, and they started building the city around the fortress Rai Pithora, Kila Pithora, whose ruins are there today. The next one, please. Now, what did they do? I mean, how did they build the city? They first built a mosque, which is Qubbatul Islam. It was extended in the area. It was extended by Iltutmish. Before that, Qutubuddin Aibak had built the Victory Tower, Qutub Minar. And then, of course, it was extended by Alauddin Khalji, one of the rulers, who built several structures in the Qutub complex. When you enter the Qutub complex, you always have the feeling that construction is going on. It is still unfinished. Because construction was constantly going on during this period. Palaces were built. Next slide, please. So this is the Qutub, next one. This is the Qutub Delhi. Palaces were built. A new fort came up close to the mosque, which was called Hisar-e-No. And this is probably what is today called Lal Court or the Red Palace. All right. Now, next, please. Now, Alauddin Khalji, of course, made this part. Who followed, the Khaljis followed the first dynasty, made this part as his capital. And we find that he created a grain market here for the provision of food grains to the people. There is a place today also which is called Sarai Adil. Sarai means, a center where all the merchants congregated and they lived. If merchants are coming there, means trade is taking place. So it was a market which is near Badaun Gate. These structures are still there, and they are sort of in a very bad shape. People have encroached upon it. So he created a market there. Now, we find that the Kutub Fort, that is where the people lived. Next, please. Where the people lived. During this period, there was an invasion from someone called Kutluk Khwaja from the northwest. And people, they all congregated inside the Qutub Minar complex. They were distressed because, the fort was in ruins. And it is then that Alauddin Khalji, of course, ordered, the repair of the court. Now, we find that in 14th century, Qutubuddin Mubarak Shah Khalji ordered the completion of the entire city and the fort of Delhi near Qutub Minar, which his father, Alauddin Khalji, had left, he had just sort of left it in that way. Now, the next area where Delhi got another city, next please, it's called Kilokari. Kilokari is a village which is just across the road, It's called Kilokari, and it's called Sheher-e-No. Sheher means a city, No means new in Persian. It was founded by, Sultan Muizuddin Kekubad, who was one of the last of the early Turkish sultans of Delhi. All right. And we find that there are several sources which talk about, this entire place. So while Qutub Minar and the area under Qutub Minar was being built, you also have another city coming up near Kilokari because water was very close by. Now, and this was, of course, during the end of the 13th century. Now, you have Ziauddin Barni. The next, please. The famous, the famous historian coming during this period. And he, of course, writes in detail about Kilokari. And he talks very, very pleasingly about the Sultan. Next slide. He gives the description of the village, and he, in fact, let me just read out portions from it, which are here in front of you. On the bank of river Jawan, which is Yamuna, at Kilokari, he laid the foundations of a grand palace, all right, and a splendid garden. Kekubad moved there and started living with officers, nobles, close courtiers, and servants. In the beginning, the nobility and the aristocracy built small houses below the royal palace. Gradually, they realized that the Sultan was inclined to stay in Kilokari for a longer period, so they built palaces, houses, and, of course, mosques. The head of the professional, and Kilokari, of course, became the center of trade, music, you have wine cellars coming, you have perfumes being sold. So it became a place of pleasure. So it was a very, very important city during this period. But unfortunately, we don't know where the city is. It is lost to us. You see, it's lost to us over a period of time through encroachments, through a lot of, what you call invasions. We just don't know where the city is. for today's knowledge, we know there's a village called Kilokri, which is a village which happens to be within the state of Delhi, and it's not a great place to be in. But if we say that is Kilokri, then it was a fantastic city during the 13th century, which was coming up parallel to the city around Kutub. Now, and it was being built by the last ruler of the slave dynasty, the first dynasty of Delhi Sultanate. Now, we have the third city coming up, which is called Siri. You all must have visited the Siri Fort, Hauz Khas, that area. That Siri was actually built by Alauddin Khalji. While he was building up the city, he realized that, in fact, Siri has a special fondness for Alauddin Khalji, because while he was trying to establish power, he camped there. In 13th century, he camped there because he had to attack Qutub Minar. It's not very far from Qutub Minar if you look at the location of Siri. Siri Fort, what we call very, very popularly. He camped there to attack Qutub Minar, and it has special memories for him. And Siri became what you call the camped city, which is also called the Lashkar Gah. Lashkar means soldiers. Gah is a place where the soldiers are camped. All right. And we find that Alauddin Khalji actually came out of the Red Palace, which was there in Siri, to face Kutluk Khwaja. In fact, we find that there are various stories about Alauddin Khalji fighting various generals whose names are given here. You have Targi, you have, other people. And the special attraction for Qutub Minar, for Alauddin Khalji and for all the rulers of Delhi Sultanate was the presence of a famous Sufi shrine, a very famous Sufi called Bakhtiyar Kaki, Qutubuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki. All rulers wanted the blessings of the Sufi saint because they believed. It was a superstition. They believed that if the Sufi saints blessed them, they will be able to rule longer and better. So it had an ideological belief in their mind. So they all wanted to be close. Second reason they wanted to be close to the Sufi Dargah, because Sufi Dargah invited a whole lot of people, irrespective of their faith. They wanted to control the people. They wanted to bring the people closer to them and say that we are your Sultan, obey us. Thirdly, most of the Sufi Dargahs and temples, if you see, are all around the water sources. Water is a very, very precious commodity in Delhi. It was not so easily available. And shifting of capitals took place because of the water thing. So everybody wanted the control over the water through these Sufi Dargahs. So that's why Sufi Dargahs became a major attraction for the sultans during this period. Then we come to the next city which came up, which is called Tughlaqabad, which I strongly recommend on a one leisurely evening, hop onto a bus or into an auto and just go to Tughlaqabad. It's a beautiful sprawling fort. And it's in ruins, but it leaves you so much to imagination, And opposite to that is the tomb of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, which is also very, very, it's a very haunted is the wrong word, but you kind of get transported back to history. It's not very far from where you are. Now, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, actually, that is the father of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He started the building of this fort and city. It was completed by Muhammad bin Tughlaq. There are various buildings in that fort which are in ruins, of course. The fort was on a hill, and for the first time we see extensive use of lime, that is chuna, what we call. It is a binding material. Now, I'll not get into the details of it, but we find, it's all here. You will be getting this PowerPoint, so please don't worry. I'll be sort of transmitting it to your coordinator. So we find that, the fort, sort of attracted a lot of people, a lot of writers. The famous, what you call, next slide, the famous traveler called Ibn Battuta, who came from Morocco, actually records the construction of Tughlaqabad. And he sort of talks about it, that, and I'll just read out, one day Tughlaq was accompanying Qutub al-Din, and pointing to the site, he said, "O Lord of the world, how good it would be if a city could be built here." The Sultan replied sharply, "Build it when you are a Sultan. As God willed, he did become the Sultan, Old Delhi changes its meaning all the time. Today for us, the Old Delhi is, Chandni Chowk. But during the period of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, Old Delhi was actually the Kutub complex. All right. And when Siri became a city, Old Delhi was again the Kutub complex. Later on, when Firozabad was established, Old Delhi became the Tughlaqabad region. So the word old keeps changing its meaning. Lastly, very briefly, I come to what is called Firozabad, which was, of course, the famous city of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. It was close to the river Yamuna. As I said, water is very easily available. And, he built it to sort of course, get water, because the water had got completely exhausted in the Kutub region. People were moving out. There was a brief period of parched dryness. And, of course, there wasn't much that could be done. To the final point, which is the cultural legacy of Delhi Sultanate. And focusing on Delhi. Delhi became a region of a large number of shrines of Sufi saints. As I said, you have Kutubuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki. I don't know whether you visited his tomb when you were there in Qutub Minar. Then there is Hazrat Nizamuddin, which is very close by. Then there is Chirag Dilli, which is again near Mehroli. And these Sufi shrines were also the centers for the development of very, very vibrant musical traditions. In fact, Delhi had so many shrines of Sufi saints that people would call respectfully Delhi as Hazrat Delhi. Like we say the holy place. So similarly, people would say Hazrat Delhi. Now, this was a place, the city was a place where culture throve, languages throve, with great languages developed. There was Arabic and Persian language and script, which later on became very, very popular in India. But interestingly, it's also not only Persian and Arabic, but the Hindavi dialect, which is the older form of Hindi, also developed during this period. And the person who wrote, a famous poet, who wrote a lot in Hindavi was Amir Khusro. If you visit Hazrat Nizamuddin's Dargah, just when you enter the Dargah is the tomb of Amir Khusro, because he was supposed to be the disciple or the murid of Hazrat Nizamuddin. All right, and he wrote, in Persian, he wrote in Hindavi, and from there we have the birth of the language Hindi coming up. He wrote in 14th century, and he described Indian scenes, settings. He wrote about love, war. I mean, he was a very, very vibrant author. And interestingly, he was also a true lover of Delhi. It is he who coined this famous word, which is called, if there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this, and which is in Delhi. For him, Delhi was a paradise. And this verse was inscribed 3 centuries later in the Diwan-e-Khas region of the Red Fort. I don't know whether you've been to the Red Fort. There is a Diwan-e-Khas, and these words are, inscribed there. And Amir Khusro is a very popular, poet. We have the Khusro Festival, which takes place every year in Delhi. A lot of Hindi film songs are inspired by him. They quote verbatim from his verses. So he is a very, very popular. He's actually the cultural legacy of Delhi. So Delhi had a culture which was Arabic, Persianate, Hindavi. You have Sanskrit flourishing. You have, this is a period when a good mixture of various cultures was taking place and new cultures were developing. You see that in architecture, you see that in language, you see that in the population of the period. All right. So this is where I stop with Delhi Sultanate. Now let us look at the Vijayanagar period. Yeah. Now the capital of Vijayanagar was Hampi, and these are the structures within the fort of Hampi. All right. The rulers of Vijayanagar were, Harihar and Bukka. And it has been said, now this is a story, that when Muhammad bin Tughlaq was expanding in the Deccan region, which is the north part of South India, okay, he employed, 2 people in his army as generals who are called Harihar and Bukka. And they converted to Islam. Now this is a story, please understand. And when they were taken to Delhi, they were taken as prisoners to Delhi, and then they converted to Islam. Sultan found them very, very loyal and very, very efficient, so he gave them freedom and they became his generals. And they were sent back to govern the southern regions of the Delhi Sultanate. The moment they come here, they decide to rebel, and after they rebel and they establish the Vijayanagar Empire, they reconvert back to Hinduism. If you pick up any history book, this story is often mentioned there. But that is not correct at all. This conversion and reconversion story has come up much later to be written by the British historians who, in many ways, as I told you, wanted to show troubled relations between... Sure, excuse me for a moment, please. The establishment of Vijayanagar period is not so dramatic as has been shown in various places. It has often been considered the last Hindu bastion, which is also incorrect, because the Vijayanagar rulers followed the traditions of Delhi Sultanate. Their dresses which they wore a cap, which is, and they wore a robe, which is very, very Arabic. They were tremendously influenced from the Arab states. And of course, they had, very, very, they followed a lot of Islamic traditions, On the other hand, while on one hand they followed the Islamic traditions because they traded with the Arabs, they also adopted a lot of Sanskritic Brahminical traditions because they had to rule in the southern portion of India, which had a long history of temple structures. So you see, they were being very, very practical. To the Arabs, from where their income came, huge income came, Arabs were importers, exporters to India of horses. Indian climate does not permit good horses. So horses always came from Arabia. And that is why everybody wanted to control this trade, which was coming from the Arabs. So Vijayanagar rulers, to impress the Arabs, had one side of it where they called themselves as sultans. It is there in their records. On the other hand, when they had to address the South Indian audience, they called themselves as Maharaja or as Raya. All right. So we have Vijayanagar here constantly, in next slide, please, in the southern portion, in this whole of India, and the famous warfare between Vijayanagar and Bahmani Sultanate, which had, can you just go to the previous slide? Bahmanis are somewhere here, and Vijayanagar is here. The Bahmani, rulers also came up as a rebellion to the Delhi Sultanate. And the Bahmani rulers were, Islamic, they were Muslims by faith. And there was a constant fight with the Vijayanagar rulers, which has been often interpreted as Hindu-Muslim conflict, which it was not. In fact, the daughters of Bahmani Sultanate were married into the Vijayanagar Empire's rulers, and the Vijayanagar Empire's daughters were also married into the Bahmani Sultanate. The fight was over the rivers which were flowing there. And this constant fight there was nothing religious about the fight. It was a fight over resources. New cities were established. Bahmani ruler established a new city called Firozabad. And we find that this fight was over the river called River Tungabhadra, which is there, which is flowing, in the southern region. And there's a place called Raichur Doab, which is a place called Raichur, and it is flowing between two rivers, Krishna Godavari. So we find that the Vijayanagar rulers borrowed heavily from the Delhi Sultanate where their army is concerned. They followed a system of Ikta, which they call the Nayaka system. And we also find that they had relations with Vijayanagar rulers. This was a period which saw for the first time the Portuguese coming to India, and Portuguese travelers. And you have the next slide. You have several eyewitness You have several eyewitness accounts of the kingdom of Vijayanagar. The word Vijayanagar means the city of victory. You see, the name is given like this so that people get impressed. And we have a very, very famous Portuguese traveler called Domingo Page. And Page writes during this period about this entire city of Vijaynagar, and he came, after him came another Portuguese traveler called Fernão Nunes. Now, according to Page, it was a huge city, and it could not be seen from one spot. And according to him, as it is written here, it was as large as Rome. There were lakes, there were palaces, there were gardens, all kinds of descriptions he gives. And it's a very fascinating description which we find during this period. In Hampi, there were royal palaces. Hampi is very, very well known for its water reservoirs. The Vijayanagar rulers built tanks, they built dams, all within Hampi. And so we find, and they built excellent stables where elephants and horses were kept. Agriculture was carried on, taxes were collected. So you see, it was a very, very efficient empire during this period. All right. And in 1545, in 16th century, a very famous emperor came, whose name is Krishnadeva Raya. He is supposed to have made a lot of changes. He introduced a lot of reforms, unfortunately, into which I cannot get in details. But we must remember that this was one of the empires in India which is less studied. It is in southern India, and it was also, like Delhi Sultanate, full of composite culture. Various languages flourished, and it was also visited by the Portuguese for the first time, who had started coming during this period. So Vijayanagar and Delhi Sultanate are two big empires that we study in the medieval period before the Mughals. Very quickly, let us look at the regional states. I mean, you must have been given lectures on political science. I don't know whether you've been taught, but whatever little if you understand of the Indian politics, it's an era of coalition government. That's what we all talk about. And these coalition governments are coming from the states. And there are 28 states. I hope I'm right, because my political science is very poor. There are 28 states in India today. Each state has a specific language, specific geography, food, culture. And, the question that you should ask, that were these states like this forever? No, these states were never like this forever. These states came up at a very modern period of history. Where they are located, in these areas, various regional states came up, over a period of time. Today, the regional states that were very famous, and you will be visiting them, is Jaipur. It was a regional state once upon a time. Jodhpur, I don't know whether you'll be visiting Jodhpur. Udaipur, these were all regional states. We have, in the modern states, which were very, very popular regional states, you have Gujarat, Bengal, Kashmir, Orissa. And all these states were constantly attacked by the Delhi Sultanate rulers, followed by the Mughals, and also by the Vijayanagar Empire, because these were very, very strong states. They are small in size, but they're very strong. They have an excellent income. And they had, because they were small, they were better managed, which is a fact. Now, in the medieval period, apart from Persian and Arabic and Hindu that we spoke about, numerous regional languages have come up, over which, again, very little research has been done. For instance, in Rajasthan, there was a very famous poet called Malik Muhammad Jaisi, and he wrote this very beautiful epic called Padmavat. The story of Padmavat is that there is a Rani Padmini, and there are several Rani Padminis in Rajasthan. There is not one. So it's a legend which he created. And Alauddin Khalji came to capture Rajasthan, this part of Rajasthan. And of course, he fell in love with the queen. He wanted her, but the queen was married. She refused to go to Alauddin Khalji. So she committed, literally speaking, it's a suicide, but she jumped into the fire when her husband died, which is called Sati or Johar. All right, and it is written by Malik Muhammad Jaisi. He's full of praises for Padmini. He's full of praises for his, for the Rajput ruler. He is cursing Alauddin Khalji. If you pick up the popular comics, which are called Amar Chitra Katha uses Jaisi, and they'll portray Alauddin Khalji as greedy, as an evil ruler, and Rajput ruler and his wife as someone who are very pious. But this is actually Jaisi, Malik Muhammad Jaisi, writing during this period. And he belonged to this particular regional state. So So these states have a long sense of loyalty. There are languages which are developing during this period. We also find the second aspect of the regional states is their religion. You have a lot of local religious cults flourishing, which are today integrated either in Hinduism or Jainism or Buddhism, but there are lots of local cults functioning. I don't know how much of you know about Orissa. You have the famous Jagannath cult. That was a local regional cult, which is now made a part of Hinduism. In Rajasthan, there's a temple called Karni Devi. I don't know, it's near Bikaner. And that place is infested with rats. You have to believe it, because I've been there. You know, you enter and people worship those rats. Now, that's a local cult. And, they're eating and they're roaming about, they're not biting you. Pardon? Okay, it's there, it's a video. So that's a local cult. That's not a larger Brahminical or the Hindu cult. So you have local cults, local festivals, which sacrifice goats, which sacrificed buffaloes. They all flourished during this period. The third aspect about these regional states are that these states, had again a very, very strong, local culture. They were not isolated regions, as we study in history. They interacted with each other. They held sometimes the Delhi Sultanate to ransom. I gave you the example of the Sharkis of Jaunpur. Jaunpur is in East UP, a very underdeveloped area today, but it has an excellent mosque called the Atala Mosque. I mean, just for your information, I don't think any tourist also goes there. ASI also hasn't mapped it properly. It's a beautiful mosque, and there's a very beautiful, a bathing house, which was built by the Sharkis. Sharkis came up during the period of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Before that, also they were there, and they were a constant source of trouble for the Delhi Sultanate. They wouldn't let people of Delhi Sultanate expand eastwards. Finally, Firoz Shah Tughlaq entered the city, and he completely demolished it. There are lots of structures which were demolished by Firoz Shah Tughlaq, and the Sharkis were ruined. They were completely taken away. You have several states like this in India, regional states, which came up and went. And of course, they were sort of, attacked by the Vijaynagar and the Delhi Sultan, the big rulers. You have the local art which is flourishing. If you go to Baba Khadak Singh Marg in Delhi, there are these emporia of every state which is there. And take a visit into those states, you will find the local art, the regional art and handicrafts of these states flourishing. They did not emerge from Delhi Sultanate. They did not emerge from the Vijayanagar Empire. They emerged in these regional states, and they were patronized by them. A lot of them are, of course, dying today. There are efforts to conserve them. But do take up a visit, at Baba Khadak Singh Marg, and visit these emporium to get the idea of how regional art and culture was and has been flourishing till today. So I just stop here, because otherwise one can just keep on and on. But one finds that some of the most important regional states was Jaunpur region, which is, as I said, in East Uttar Pradesh. You have Kashmir. It was a center of Shaivism. It was a center of the Rishi Silsila. It became a very, very vibrant center of Persianate culture. Islam in Kashmir was a mixture of all this. Today people recognize it as a part of Kashmiriyat, but all of it flourished in the 14th century. You have Al-Baruni visiting India in 11th century, talking about it. And we find that one of the greatest rulers of Kashmir was Zainul Abidin, who was there from 1420 to 1470. And he is somebody, who abolished jizya. He got translated, a lot of scholarly material in Sanskrit was translated into Persian under Zainul Abidin. And we find that he was responsible for building canals, for developing the handicrafts of Kashmir, for spread of education, a very, very enlightened ruler during this period. In fact, under his patronage, the Mahabharata, the famous, Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, and one of the earliest histories of Kashmir called Raj Tarangini, which was written by Kalhan, were translated into Persian. And many Persian and Arabic works were translated into Hindi. He himself was a poet. He was a writer, and his pen name was Kutub. All right, and Interestingly, Kashmir had great relations with China during those days. I mean, I don't know how, nobody's worked on it, but there was a lot of exchange with China during this period. Bengal was another place which had come up. Gujarat, since we can't get into detail, was another area which was very, very powerful during this period. And of course, you have the Bahmani Sultanate. So I stop here, and what I want to emphasize are three things. Number one, the medieval period in Indian history is a very, very vibrant period. It should not be looked through the prism of the sword of Islam. Very careful, be very careful about it. Because you see, we are all beings of history. We are all children of history. We are carrying the baggage with us. But a good history research means you go back to the times, look at the various writings which are present, just not one group of writings, which the British historians have done, and see what is coming out of it. You have different views coming out, and then you will realize that it has been a very, very vibrant period. Secondly, it is a period where just not Arabic and Persian flourished, various languages flourished. This is a very important period. All the languages that we see today, all their histories, if you pick up, actually began in the medieval period, under the patronage of regional rulers, under the patronage of the sultans of Delhi, under the Vijaynagar ruler. So it is a period of regionalism on one hand, but also big empires like the Sultanate and the Vijaynagar on the other hand. Now, when the Mughals come, they put all of it under one umbrella. And by 17th century, Mughal Empire is one of the largest empire in India, in the world. In fact, Asia in the 16th century had the three largest empires of the world. One were the Safavids, second were the Ottoman Turks, and the third were the Mughals. And amongst the three, Mughals was the largest. Mughals combined the Delhi Sultanate, they took over Vijayanagar Empire, they took over the regional kingdoms, and it was a huge empire which has its own history, which you would be following next. I stop here, and in case, how do I transmit this? Do you want this PowerPoint? Yes. How do I give it to you? It's saved here. Okay, fine. Do not circulate the pictures too much because, I sort of took it from various places, but the matter is fine. It's all yours. All right? So anybody who wishes to ask me anything? I'm sorry I had to rush through the last two. Okay? Okay then. Thank you. Thank you.